Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to create, once again, a beautiful fellowship, respectful of both the text that's before us written in a book, and also to respect the text of those who appear before us in these beautiful frames of lives and integrity. So we are in Torah portion Vayigash, which is in the book of Genesis, chapter 44, beginning with verse 18. We will read through the English translation. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation about it. If at this point you'd like to go ahead and unmute, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of being in this moment together. Baruch atah
Adonai
asher
iskanu
mitzvotah
tzivanu
la'asot divrei Torah.
Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses, and I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read verses from the English translation as well. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please, my lord, let your servant appeal to my lord, and do not be impatient with your servant, you who are the equal of Pharaoh." My lord asked his servants, "Have you a father or another brother?" We told my lord, "We have an old father, and there is a child of his old age, the youngest. His full brother is dead, so that he alone is left of his mother, and his father dotes on him. Then you said to your servants, 'Bring him down to me, that I may set eyes on him.' We said to my lord, 'The boy cannot leave his father. If he were to leave him, his father would die.' But you said to your servants, 'Unless your youngest brother comes down with you, do not let me see your faces.' When we came back to your servant, my father, we reported my lord's words to him." Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 25?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Later, our father said, "Go back and procure some food for us." We answered, "We cannot go down. Only if your youngest brother is with us can we go down. For we may not show our faces to the man unless our youngest brother is with us." Your servant, my father, said to us, "As you know, my wife bore me 2 sons, but the one is gone from me." And I said, "Alas, he was torn by a beast, and I have not seen him since. If you take this one from me, too, and he meets with disaster, you will send my white head down to Sheol in grief. Now, if I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his own life is so bound up with his, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. And your servants will send the white head of your servant, our father, down to Sheol in grief. Now your servant has pledged himself for the boy to my father, saying, 'If I do not bring him back to you, I shall stand guilty before my father forever. Therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave to my lord instead of the boy, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father unless the boy is with me? Let me not be witness to the woe that would overtake my father.'"
Thank you. Anna, do you want to read? Okay, let me invite June. Would you like to read at the very start of chapter 45?
Thank you, Rabbi. Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone withdraw from me." So there was no one else about when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. His sobs were so loud that the Egyptians could hear, and so the news reached Pharaoh's palace. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still well?" But his brothers could not answer him, so dumbfounded were they on account of him. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come forward to me." And when they came forward, he said, I am your brother Joseph, he whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or reproach yourselves because you sold me hither. It was to save life that God sent me ahead of you. It is now 2 years that there has been famine in the land, and there are still 5 years to come in which there shall be no yield from tilling. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his household, and ruler over the whole land of Egypt.
Thank you, Jude. And David and Susan, would you like to continue there at verse 9?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord to all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. And you shall dwell in the land of Goshen and shall be close to me, you and your sons and the sons of your sons and your flocks and your cattle and all that is yours. And I will sustain you there for yet 5 years of famine remain, lest you lose all, you and your household and all that is yours. And look, your own eyes can see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that is my very mouth that speaks to you. And you must tell my father all my glory in Egypt and all that you have seen, and hurry and bring down my father here.
He then fell weeping on his brother Benjamin's neck, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept with them. Only after this could his brothers respond to him. And the report was heard in Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have arrived. And this pleased Pharaoh and his courtiers. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load up your beasts and head straight for the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt. Come, eat the fat of the land. Moreover, you are instructed to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and convey your father, and come. And don't look with regret at your household's goods, because the best that the whole land of Egypt offers is yours.
Thank you both so much. Kath, would you like to continue there at verse 21?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh had commanded, and he supplied them with provisions for the journey. To each of them, moreover, he gave a change of clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and several changes of clothing. And to his father he sent the following: 10 he-asses laden with the best things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with grain, bread, and provisions for his father on the journey. As he sent his brothers off on their way, he told them, do not be quarrelsome on the way. They went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. Yes, he is ruler over the whole land of Egypt. His heart went numb, for he did not believe them. But when they recounted all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Enough, said Israel. My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die.
Thank you. And Dave, would you like to continue there at the start of chapter 46? Dave, would you like to read at the start of chapter 46? Okay, I think we're having some problems there. Jim, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 46?
Thank you, Rabbi. So Israel set out with all that was his, and he came to Beersheba, where he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God called to Israel in a vision by night, Jacob, Jacob. He answered, Here. And he said, I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down to Egypt, for I will make you there into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I myself will also bring you back, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel put their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. And they took along their livestock and the wealth that they had amassed in the land of Canaan. Thus Jacob and all his offspring with him came to Egypt. He brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. These are the names of the Israelites, Jacob and his descendants who came to Egypt. Jacob's firstborn Reuben, Reuben's sons Enoch, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Simeon's sons Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Joachim, Zohar, and Saul, the son of Canaanite woman. Levi's son Gershon, Kohath, and Matari. Judah's sons Onan, Shelah, Paris, and Zerah. But and Onam had died in the land of Canaan, and Perez's sons were Hezron and Hamul. Issachar's sons, Tola, Puvah, Iab, and Shimron. Zebulun's sons, Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. Those were the sons whom Leah bore to Jacob in Padam Aram, in addition to his daughter Dinah, persons in all, male and female, 33.
Thank you, Jim. And Dave, would you like to read at the very verse 16?
Okay, my microphone working now? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Gad's sons, Ziphon, Haggai, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Rodi, and Areli. Asher's sons, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah, and their sister Sarah. Beriah's sons, Eber and Malchiel. These were the descendants of Zilpah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Leah. These she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Jacob's wife, Rachel, were Joseph and Benjamin. To Joseph were born in the land of Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asnah, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Benjamin's sons, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ahah, Rosh, Mupapim, and Ard. These were all the descendants of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. Dan's son, Hushim. Naphtali's sons, Jaziel, Gune, Jezer, and Shilem. These were the descendants of Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel. These she bore to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came to Egypt, his own issue aside from the wives of Jacob's sons, all these persons numbered 66. And Joseph's sons were born to him in Egypt were 2 in number. Thus the total of Jacob's household who came to Egypt were 70 persons.
Thank you so much. Catherine, would you like to read at the start of verse 28?
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. He had sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to point the way before him to Goshen. So when they came to the region of Goshen, Joseph ordered his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. He presented himself around the neck a while. And Israel said to Joseph, now I can die, having seen for myself that you are still alive. Then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell the news to Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds. They have always been breeders of livestock, and they have brought with them their flocks and herds and all that is theirs. So when Pharaoh summons you and asks, what is your occupation? You shall answer, your servants have been breeders of livestock from the start until now, both we and our fathers, so that you stay in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are abhorrent to Egyptians.
Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to continue that at the very start of chapter 47?
Yes, thank you. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. And he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Jay. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. Joseph then brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob greeted Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked Jacob, how many are the years of your life? And Jacob answered Pharaoh, the years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespans of my fathers during their sojourns. Then Jacob bade Pharaoh farewell in that Pharaoh's presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, giving them holdings in the choicest part of the land of Egypt, in the region of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread down to the little ones.
Thank you, Jay. Let me invite Marty to continue there at verse 13.
Thank you, Rabbi. Now there was no bread in all the world, for the famine was very severe. Both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered in all the money that was to be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan as payment for the rations that were being procured. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's palace. And when the money gave out in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, lest we die before your very eyes, for the money is gone. And Joseph said, bring your livestock, and I will sell to you against your livestock, if the money is gone. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, for the stocks of sheep and cattle, and the asses. Thus he provided them with bread that year in exchange for all their livestock. And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, we cannot hide from my lord that with all the money and animal stocks consigned to my lord, nothing is left at my lord's disposal, save our persons and our farmland. Let us not perish before your eyes, both we and our land. Take us and our land in exchange for bread, and we with our land will be serfs to Pharaoh. Provide the seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become a waste.
Thank you, Marty. And Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 20?
Thank you, Rabbi. So Joseph brought all the farmland of the Egyptians for Pharaoh, bought, and for the Egyptians, for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold, each one his field, for the famine had become too strong for them, and the land became Pharaoh's. And he transferred the populace to the cities, from one end of the boundary of Egypt to the other end. Only the farmland of the priests did he not buy, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they ate their allotment that Pharaoh had given them. Therefore, they did not sell their farmland. Joseph said to the people, "Behold, I have brought you and your farmland. I have bought you and your farmland today for Pharaoh. Behold, you have seed, so sow the soil. And it shall be concerning the crops that you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and the remaining 4 parts shall be yours, for seed for your fields, for your food, for those in your houses, and for your young children to eat." They replied, "You've saved our lives. Let us find favor in my Lord's eyes, and we will be slaves to Pharaoh." So Joseph made it a statute to this day concerning the farmland of Egypt for the 1/5. Only the farmland of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's. And Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and they were prolific and multiplied greatly.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. I've entitled this week's study session, Reframing the Past. And so what I'd like to do is to go back towards the beginning of our portion and to look at this very dramatic moment where Joseph really has the family, his brothers, whom he hasn't yet revealed himself to them yet. He has them in quite a bind. As you recall, he has planted money within the saddlebag of Benjamin and has threatened to take Benjamin and either take him as a slave or perhaps worse as a result. And Judah steps forward and pleads on behalf of Benjamin in particular and the whole family. And at the conclusion of Judah's presentation, there's this moment where Joseph pauses, and then the text says he could no longer control himself. Let me read to you what's on number 1 from our Torah portion. Joseph could no longer control himself. His sobs were so loud. "I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. God sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in an extraordinary deliverance. So it was not you who sent me here, but God." Joseph has them within his power to do whatever he wants to, and he still is bearing within him the memories of what his brothers did to him. And instead of using his power to throw them all in prison or to perhaps not provide them with grain as punishment, to let them suffer as he had suffered, instead, he not only responds by revealing himself to them and not only offering to share food and grain and sanctuary with them, but he also reframes for them what happened in the past so that they won't have to live under this terrible burden of guilt that they in fact had sold them into slavery. He says, don't think of it as something that was a terrible act that you performed. Really, what happened was a blessing. It allowed me to not only save an entire nation, an entire world, but in particular, it allowed me to save you, my family. And so he reshapes what happened in the past so that they together might have some kind of future. So I'd like to take that notion of reframing past events as a way to be able to live well into the future, and look in particular at three 20th century Jewish psychologists, each of whom took a slightly different emphasis or approach, but all of whom dealt with how the past can sometimes dwell within us to make it us incapable of living well into the future. And so I'd like to explore these three. The first of them is Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl, as you may know, survived Auschwitz, and he then wrote this very significant work called Man's Search for Meaning. And his basic message was that the one thing that the Nazis could not take away from those who were their prisoners was their freedom to decide on how to respond to their captivity. And so here's a quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. The second psychologist I want to explore is Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman became the founder of what became known as positive psychology. And he was dealing with those patients of his who were deeply depressed. And he developed this notion that they were suffering from a kind of learned helplessness, that all that befell them was their own fault. There was nothing they could do about it. And they would just continue to live under this burden of having done wrong things. And so he developed, in response to that, what he called learned optimism. And here's from Martin Seligman. Above all, during the interval, change from ego orientation to task orientation. While you can't control your experiences, you can control your explanations. Pessimistic labels lead to passivity, whereas optimistic ones lead to attempts to change. You know, as I share this with you, I'm struck by what is similar between Viktor Frankl and Martin Seligman. They both refer to a kind of space in between an event and response to it. Viktor Frankl talks about between stimulus and response, there's a space. And here Martin Seligman talks about there's an interval between what has happened to you or around you and how you respond to it. And it's fascinating to me that at least in the way the Torah is written, there is this space between the conclusion of Judah's speech and Joseph's response to it. Well, let's take a look at one more Jewish 20th century psychologist, and that's number 4, and that's from Aaron Beck. Aaron Beck becomes probably what considered to be the founder of what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy. And here's what he wrote. If our thinking is bogged down by distorted symbolic meanings, illogical reasoning, and erroneous interpretations, we become, in truth, blind and deaf. We can intervene consciously about the interpretation that we make of things that happen to us. We can choose what to internalize about certain facts. So Aaron Beck develops this practice of choosing what to act upon and then to develop behavior that will relieve one of any kind of negative drawdown on one's spirit. In a sense, it's quite similar if one wants to read some of the writings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who dealt with his own forms of deep depression. He also develops this, if you want, spiritual psychology about the capacity to not only recognize that one has done terrible things and that terrible things have happened to one, but that one has the capacity to also imagine and act upon the opposite, that one is also capable of great things and to act upon that sense of greatness. So this notion about the effect of the past upon us and our capacity, if you will, to choose how to live into the future rather than to feel eternally captive of the past, I would like to explore in the context of these paintings that I have on the very front of our page. So these are two paintings. One on the left-hand side is titled A Portrait of a Young Gentleman by Kehinde Wiley, who's a current contemporary painter. I believe he still lives in New York City. And on the right-hand side is a painting also titled A Portrait of a Young Gentleman. This is by Thomas Gainsborough, and this one was painted in 1770. What Kehinde Wiley did, he was commissioned to actually paint something in celebration of the anniversary of the creation of the Huntington Museum in Los Angeles, which owns the Gainsborough painting. And he paints this image of a hip, young, Black man who is posed in the same manner as the character in Gainsborough's painting. The same posture, he's holding a hat, he has his head kind of posed in a way to indicate some degree of regalness, if you will. And what Kehinde Wiley is really famous for, he himself was raised going to the Huntington and being so impressed with the classic portrait paintings that were there. And he's most famous for taking classical paintings and then reimagining them in quite contemporary settings with African-American figures replacing those of European figures, white European figures. So in a sense, it is a way to either contemporize something from the past, or perhaps it's to displace something from the past. We're going to explore that a little bit as to the significance of what Wiley is doing here. What's also fascinating is Gainsborough painting itself is of a figure who is not really dressed in the garments of someone who lived in 1770s, but rather someone who is dressed in the garments of someone who would have lived about 130 years ago. And this was Gainsborough's way of giving recognition to the painter that he thought was one of the greatest painters who ever lived, and that is Van Wyck. And so what he, in a sense, is doing is honoring a past tradition that of a style that was painted 130 years before and painting it in his contemporary times. But what also is significant about the painting is the color. Now, this painting eventually becomes popularly known as Blue Boy. And it's evident because of this color blue, which is in particular, it's known as Prussian blue, that Gainsborough uses here. Prussian blue was really a very, very recently created color. It was actually a color that was created by accident somewhere around 1704 to 1706, and wasn't even mass produced in Europe until about 1750, just 20 years before Gainsborough paints this. So Gainsborough brings in this brand new color, which is also meant as a form of critique about the conventions of the time, because this painting by Gainsborough is first exhibited in the Royal Academy of Arts And the president of the Royal Academy of the Arts at the time was Joshua Reynolds, who was considered one of the greatest portrait painters of his times. And Reynolds had very strict notions about what was appropriate in terms of the design and framing and colors in a painting. And for him, the colors that should be dominant in a painting were warm colors, reds and yellows. And he said, and blues, Reynolds said, should really be limited to the background. So here is Gainsborough, who is challenging the president of the Royal Academy of Arts and his principles about what colors should be foregrounded and which should be backgrounded. And he takes this brand new color and puts it in the foreground. So in a sense, what he is doing in his painting is, on the one hand, he's honoring something from over 100 years ago. He is critiquing conventions of the present. And by using this brand new color, he is kind of pioneering into the future what paintings might look like. So these two paintings are now both exhibited at the Huntington Museum in Los Angeles. They face one another. And so they are in conversation with one another. And what they have each on their own canvas is this presence of both past, presence, and future. Because just as Gainsborough in his painting brings together past, present, and future, so does Kehinde Wiley. Kehinde Wiley, I want to suggest, is paying homage to a kind of portraiture that really no one else was doing anymore in the 21st century, or the 20th century for that matter. He's honoring that by picking up on this pose of portraiture from Gainsborough. He's also critiquing it because he's saying, well, it's not only whites of European descent who deserve to be displayed as aristocratic and regal. African Americans too have a place of regality and respect. And he is introducing these neon colors of periwinkle and orange, all of which is indicating that there's something brand new that is being offered here, and that to repair the limitations, if you will, the racial limitations of the present moment, we need to move forward into the future by giving recognition to the stature and status of those who are of African American descent. When I looked at this and I sense that what both, especially Kehinde and Wiley, is doing is they are presenting, they're giving honor to a moment from the past, they're giving recognition to a present, and they're also pointing towards a future. And they present all of those time dimensions in a way that doesn't mean that the present needs to serve as a negation of what has happened before, and that one can promote a future that is not the same thing as feeling guilty about the present. And what we get out of both of them, because of the colors that they use, when you get that way of being respectful both to the past, to being critiquing in a respectful way of the present, and moving forward into the future in a way that carries the past forward, you get this iridescent presence, which is demonstrated by the colors that they both use. When I was reading an interview from Kehinde Wiley, he has this remark, which I have here in number 5. He says, referring to the painting, It's a portrait of an individual who occupies space. And when I read that, I wasn't sure if Kehinde Wiley was referring to his painting or if he was referring to Thomas Gainsborough's painting. And I like to think that he was referring to both. That when one deals with past in a respectful way, when one deals with the present in a way that critiques the present while simultaneously respecting the past and simultaneously leading us into the future, that the person who can do that truly occupies the space that they're in. So with that, I'd love to hear what you thought or what you experienced as we went through our Torah portion. Let me call upon Kath, who's raised her hand, and then I'll call upon Norman and others who raised their hand as well. Kath?
In looking at the paintings, the other thing that struck me was that the background in the Wiley painting is very much like William Morris wallpaper. It's very much that pattern, which was about 100 years before. So it was going back that way. And also that the wallpaper's kind of in front of the characters. So it's almost like he's looking from the past. And then in Gainsborough's painting, the gentleman is in front of the background. So is looking forward toward the future.
Thank you for pointing all that out. I hadn't seen all of that. Thank you so much, Kath. That's fascinating. And Norman, share with us, please.
Thank you. Just as a comment, my computer does not have a camera, so that's why I'm not hiding out here. I just don't have a camera on the computer.
Okay,
I just love this reformatting of the Blue Boy. It's wonderful. I really like what you were talking about, Gainsborough breaking the artistic rules in such a very effective way, and it just highlights that artistic rules are really made to be broken, and the bigger they come, the harder they fall. Going back to and this, of course, is a great introduction to the reformatting of thought that Joseph is engineering and has been preparing for the reconciliation with his brothers. The beginning of the Parsha, where Joseph is saying, is there another brother? He needs to come here. No, he can't come here. He's got to come here. It's going to kill our father. No, he's got to come here. Going back and forth about this, to me, is establishing a common ground between Joseph and his brothers, that what's really important and what we have in common is that family is important and that family feelings are important. And that hasn't been muted by time, and it hasn't been muted by the events which have taken place.
Oh, that's beautifully put. Go ahead.
And then as it goes on, this leads to the cognitive behavioral therapy that Joseph is teaching his brothers, that we're not going to think about what happened to selling me as a catastrophe. Really, there's a spiritual overlay to it. It was God. In some ways, this is very hard to take, and it's kind of taking away from brothers the validity of their emotions that they have. But it's a reformatting, and at least to some extent, it worked in our Parsha. So the very modern introductions to cognitive behavioral therapy that you were pointing out is certainly alive and well in our Parsha.
Thank you so much, Norman. Thank you. Let me call upon Catherine and then Robert.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I just wanted to point some things out about the paintings that I noticed this time. if you look at the blue boy, there's a sort of burst of light behind him. And it's interesting how Wiley takes that and brings it out in the front of his figure, this kind of burst, this burst of orange there in the solar plexus, and brings that out into the painting and let that be the center of the painting, and then begins to cover him over in a way with his wallpaper, which is very interesting, that sort of that effect.
Oh, Catherine, that's lovely. I hadn't really noticed that foregrounding of the explosion of light, which is behind Blue Boy, and then it becomes foregrounded
Yeah.
in the tie-dye shirt, if you will. That's really lovely. I hadn't noticed that. Thank you so much. Okay, let me call upon Robert and then June.
So there we go. I wanted to lower my hand. Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. So I want to extract, at least as I read this, spiritual significance and import from the famine. And I want to use two quotes from Baha'u'llah that seem disjointed as of Alpha and Omega. And the first one is, my calamity is my providence. Outwardly it is fire and vengeance, but inwardly it is light and mercy. And the second one, where I believe the ending is, servitude is the substance, the essence of which is divinity. So it's, this really struck me because what we see as individuals who were landowners, which usually means pride, but we see them gradually giving up the material and humbling themselves little by little by little until they had no land. Now they they gladly admitted that they would be lawful or obedient servants to Pharaoh, who is the king. That's the process spiritually that I believe we need to go through as individuals, so we can say to our Lord, servitude is a substance, the essence of which is divinity. Please, God, may I achieve it. And it's interesting, and I love this part. He let the priests keep material, which is what represents, to my mind, their pagan beliefs. And he realized they're in the darkness. Leave them. And Joseph was this interlocutor, if you will. And by the way, in Islam, it's either hadith, which is a tradition, or in the Quran, I've forgotten which, a story of Joseph. And he was so handsome that when ladies of the court, when he was serving them or around that, one of them, or at least one of them, would end up cutting themselves because they were just so struck by his beauty. So it's not in the Torah, but you'll find it later on in Islam. It's just something to think about. So, but I love that part. I just love that.
Oh, I love this. First of all, as you were talking, I was going back to the Martin Seligman quote, where he talks about going from ego orientation to task orientation. And what you reminded me of is how much of Joseph, at least in his early days, was a kind of narcissistic personality, kind of taken with himself and his beauty and his gifts and so forth. And here we are at the end, where he transcends whatever ego involvement he might have had, and becomes the true servant, which is to extend all that he has and share all that he has with those who are in need, and reaches out to his brothers and lets go of whatever bitterness he may have harbored. So thank you for that. And let me invite June and then David and Susan.
Thank you. I enjoyed the comments by the three psychologists. I think perception is everything. And when I personally looked at this painting, or the two paintings together, I really got a very different impression than what you mentioned. Although both are done well, it seems to me that Wiley is almost ridiculing Blue Boy. He, where Blue Boy is looks like a very conceited young man, starting his stuff. I think Wiley's doing the same thing and says, I can be just as good as you. And, here I am. And look at me too, because I'm just as good as you are. And all these little iridescent pink, orange, to me have shapes. And some of the shapes to me look like hands. And some look like mouths, open mouths. Now, it might be the printing, I don't know, but it just seems to me that he's complimenting himself, applauding himself, and saying, I'm just as good as you. And that's how those two pictures seem to me, that one is saying, here I am, look at me, I'm terrific. And the other one is saying, well, I'm just as good as you are.
Mhm.
That's just what
No,
I
that's
got.
lovely. Thank you so much for sharing all that, June. What you got me to thinking was for me, how delightful it is that it's not just that these were two paintings that were made and that they each occupy a separate, detached universe. What is delightful for me is that these two paintings are actually hanging in the same gallery, and that they are looking at one another, and that they are engaged with one another. So it may well be that they are each having those thoughts, responses, identities that you describe, but at least they are in the same room, somehow engaged with one another, which is unfortunately something that all too often does not happen in our world today. So thank you so much for that. Let me invite David, Susan, and then Dave.
Well, I was going to say that about the two pictures hanging across from each other at the Huntington Library. The Huntington Library is someplace that I love and have been to many, 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 many times during my life. And it occurred to me that that for me, these two pictures hanging across from each other at the Huntington Library is like a reframing of the Huntington Library, because so often when I was there as a young person, everything seemed old and archaic, and it was historical, and it was up to me to maybe to make it meaningful to me in my day and time. And I love the fact that they're across from each other, and that in a way the library has reframed itself. And I was going to say about Joseph reframing his past. I was with my father and my family when we were visiting a cousin that I didn't know very well, who's older than I am by probably 14, 15 years. And he told stories about my dad's father that my dad hadn't known before. My mom's family and my dad's family were apparently painters in Russia. And when they came over here, they were painters again. And they were a member of a painters union in New York City. And they had a place in the Catskills that they would go to during the summertime. And so the stories that my cousin was telling us about my grandfather were stories that other people from Russia that were painters that were there and he didn't know he was there, kind of hidden as a little boy in the background, and were telling stories about my grandfather. And my dad never heard those stories because my grandfather didn't do that. He didn't tell stories about himself. And so here is my dad in his, let's see, how old would he have been? When did Miriam graduate? Anyhow, he was in his 90s. And he was for the first time hearing these stories about his father. And then the next thing I know, fast forward and we're back in California, and he's telling these stories and they are embellished.
Go Jack, go Jack.
Just as if he had known them all of his life. Talk about reframing. But it was really delightful. And it was great to see how he was able to take this part of his history and make it his own.
That's lovely. Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
my father also didn't have a story he couldn't improve upon.
That's lovely. That both of you, that's lovely. And Susan, I love your notion about Kehinde Wiley's painting as being a reframing of the Huntington itself. And what you got me to think about is that there is a way to critique what currently exists that doesn't either embarrass or destroy what currently exists. It revives what currently exists, and all too often, when we are dissatisfied with what the present holds, we shame it, and we want to bury it. We want to hide it, and instead, what I think both these paintings are doing, and certainly the Kehinde Wiley is doing, is a way of, as you said, reframing and reviving what currently exists and taking it in a new direction with a sense of dignity and honoring what currently exists as well. So thank you for all that. Very rich. Thank you. And let me call upon Dave. Yeah.
Okay, first, my impression of Wiley's painting is you look at it and the first thing your eyes are drawn to the watch he's wearing. So when you look at that seems like it's completely out of place. Different, everything, it just doesn't make sense. And in, let's say, Gainsborough painting, there's no such thing that really draws you to one specific thing, at least to me, anyhow. And then I want to go to say a word about the Parsha. Right in the beginning, we have a little bit of a negotiation where verse 20 says,
Yeah.
Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set eyes on him, and they agreed to that. That's kind of an ultimatum. And it kind of makes me think of the Hamas war that's going on right now. We have a negotiation which either side has non-negotiable issues, and they can never come to agreement the way they are right now. And that's what I have to say on those two issues.
Thank you, Dave. And taking us back to the very beginning of the Parsha also reminds me of something that we really haven't addressed yet, which is that about Judah. Judah was not the oldest of the brothers. And normally it would be the oldest of the brothers that would step forward and plead the family's case before the sovereign. But here it's Judah, and a lot of the commentary reflects on how Judah is the one who steps forward to plead for the integrity of the family, who in effect gives a speech that, even though he doesn't know that he's speaking to Joseph at the moment, he is speaking about the terrible things that would happen, the trauma that would happen to their father if the other child of Rachel's were not to return, were to be left in a pit. And so the commentary says that's because Judah himself has encountered his own rehabilitation, his own reframing, based upon the incident with his daughter-in-law Tamar, where he recognized that he was the one who she delicately pointed out to him what he had done wrong, and didn't do so in a way that destroyed him in the present, but allowed him to rehabilitate himself and become the person who can now stand before the mightiest person in the world and plead a case. So there again, this capacity to transform oneself and the capacity of someone, Tamar, to help someone transform themselves, not by destroying them, not by wreaking vengeance upon them, not by shaming them, but by enabling them to come to their own self refinement and self development. So, did you want to say? So I want to thank everyone for this moment where we are in the presence of great artists. We're in the presence of great artists in the form of Kahine Wiley and Thomas Gainsborough, both of whom show us that there is a way to move forward into the future that doesn't shame the present, or deny the past as merely a shattered moment in people's lives, but it can move into the future by honoring the past, critiquing the present, and inspiring people to move forward with iridescence into the future. And we're in the presence of a great work of art, in the presence of this Torah, which is constantly trying to teach us to do the same thing, that we have a capacity to refine ourselves and to be present in this moment by the extent to which we refine ourselves and take responsibility for moving forward on this journey into the future. And I want to say thank you for all of you for being the great artists that you are, to create this framework of discussion, which honors what we each have to offer. And it's an inspiration to be with all of you. Thank you so much. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.